Hello, this is Heather with Creativity by Heather BE. Welcome to the channel. If you're new, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back if you've been here before. I'm so glad you're here. So today I'm going to show you a card using the Concord 9th Cool Treats Turnabout and also the Gingham Background from Concord 9th. These were part of their May release, and I love the Concord 9th Turnabouts. I have several of them, and they have made it so much easier. In January, they came out with a Turnabout Jig, and they also have some transparencies, which I'm going to show you here in the video, and it makes it so much simpler to do. This is the Gingham Background stamp that I'm going to be using for the background of our card, and I'm going to be creating a card that's a fun summer card. For my panel, I am using Bristol Smooth Cardstock, and the reason I chose that is because I'm not ink blending, but I am using some Distress Oxide inks, and so I tend to prefer the Bristol Smooth whenever I'm using any type of Distress Oxides. So I used some adhesive to put that into my Misti. I could have used my Misti corners, but it was easier than to get them out to just go ahead and adhere that down, because I do want the stamp to cover the entire thing. So I'm going to lay that down where I want it and pick it up with my Misti door. And you do not have to have a stamping tool for this. You could just stamp up the background and lay it down and put your paper on top of it like you would a large background stamp. I just prefer to use my Misti tool, so if I need to re-ink it, I can do it again. For the color on this, I decided to use Squeeze Lemonade. I wanted this card to be very bright. This is a summery card, so I wanted to make sure it had a lot of bright colors. And this background is going to end up working out better than I thought. I was kind of worried that it might overtake some of the images from the Turnabout, but it actually fades in really well and makes a great background. I was really happy with the way this came out. So I am stamping that twice, and I'm going to pick it up and pull off my panel, and then I'm going to heat set it because it is Distress Oxide. I'm sorry about that. And whenever you're working with Distress Oxides, they do tend to stay wet. So that way you don't smear them, things like that. You're probably going to want to use a heat tool on them. To clean my stamp, I'm using the Brutus Monroe Squeaky Clean, and I'm going to clean that up really well. I'm going to clean my Misti door, kind of pull that stamp up off and make sure I have it cleaned well. And I'm using a microfiber cloth here. Any type of stamp cleaner you have will work. I love the Brutus Monroe. It's non-toxic and it smells really good. It's a lavender scent. And as always, I'll have all the products listed below for you. So I'm going to pop my panel up, and I am just going to set that aside. So this is the Concord 9th Turnabout Jig. So when they first came out, you kind of had to make one of these on your own, and it's great that they have this now. So one of my biggest tips, if you've never used this, is there are little teeny notches. Make sure your paper, your cardstock, is lined up with those notches, because if it's not, then your Turnabout will not line up if it's one that needs to line up. So that's my biggest tip in using that jig. This is the alignment transparency, and once again, I have the Tim Holtz glass mat, which is black behind it, so I lay something white. In this case, I just used the Concord 9th packaging. And I'm lining up my stamp, and you have the crisscross line, and it's clear, it's a transparency, so it's very simple to line up. And once you get it lined up, all you do is put it on the jig. So now you're going to line up the X's with the X's on the jig, and then once you get that lined up, you just close the door and pick up the stamp and pull that transparency off. Don't forget to pull the transparency off before you start stamping. I have done it before. So you don't want to put ink all over it, although you can wipe it off. So I pulled the transparency, and now I'm using Wilted Violet. And I am going to use all 4 turns of the Turnabout, and that's one of the great things about the Turnabouts. You can do them 4 times, you can do them once, you can do them twice, you can do them 3 times, or you can do them the 4. It's however you want to do it. So for this case, I decided to do it all 4 times, and the first one is the Wilted Violet, and I love that purple against that Squeeze Lemonade. It just looks like summer to me. And you can see the little number 1 up in the corner. So when you're ready for your second one, you're just going to turn it to the right. You always want your number to be in that top right-hand corner. So now my number 2 is up in the top right-hand corner. And I'm going to use Tumbled Glass for my second turn. And you can see the popsicle stick matches up. There are some of the snow cone bottoms. So that's where getting that paper up in that notch really helps. And I had a hard time picking it up, so what I decided to do was to use my Tim Holtz craft pick, where I could get it up under the paper and pull it down because I didn't want my jig to move. And you'll see me kind of poking it in the corners just to make sure it's where it's supposed to be. I'm kind of OCD about making sure it's straight. You don't have to check it as many times as I do. So now I've turned it, and my number 3 is up in the corner on the right hand side. And I'm using tea dye for my third pass. And then for the fourth one, I'm going to use worn lipstick. So now I have my number 4 up in the corner, and this is the last one. And you can see on the card where everything's lining up. And now I'm going to be using worn lipstick. And I'm going to set that panel aside, and I'm going to get my sentiment ready. I'm going to pull it off my jig. I am going to show you how simple it is to clean off this jig, because before you had to create your own, and then typically you had it laminated. You could see how cute that is. I love this Cool Treats Turnabout. So I am using some Squeaky Clean cleaner, and this is actually in a container that I just put my rag on and it squirts it out, and it cleans off very easily. So this is the Simon Says Stamp Grid Transparency, and I am not good at keeping my sentiments straight. And I bought this around Christmas time. I had seen it for about a year or so being used in videos, and it was a great investment because I cannot do a straight sentiment. Even using the grids on the Misti, I struggled, and this is great. You set your sentiment down, and then you pick it up pretty much like you do with the jig, the transparency for the turnabouts. I'm going to put my panel in, and typically you would put your panel down first and then set the transparency on it, but because it was a little bit wet, I was letting that dry. And I am going to be heat embossing on this panel, so I want to check it and make sure that all of my ink is dry. And the way you do that is use your anti-static powder tool, put some heat embossing powder on it, and if it sticks to it, then it's not. And I did have some areas where it was sticking. So what I'm going to do is pour that powder back in, and then I'm going to get my heat tool and dry up a little bit of that ink that was not completely dry. You always want to check this when you're heat embossing over Distress Oxide inks that you've just used, because they do stay wet and sit on top of the paper for a little while. So you don't want your embossing powder to stick to those wet areas. So I've used my heat tool. I'm going back with my anti-static powder bag again, and then I'm going to put some of that embossing powder. And this is the Brutus Monroe Raven embossing powder that I'm using. So I'm going to put that on, and now you can see that it all slid right off. So now I know my area where I'm going to be heat embossing is clear and it's dry. So I put my panel in, got my transparency, making sure everything's lined up, and I did use some adhesive because my transparency was moved over a little bit, so it's not exactly in the corner. I'm going to pull that off and use my Brutus Monroe embossing ink. I said this in other videos, this is one of my favorite embossing inks because it does stay wet. It doesn't dry quickly, so it kind of gives you some time before you put the embossing powder on it, because sometimes I get distracted. So that's a great little quality about this embossing ink that I love. So I'm going to pull that off, and I was out of my repositionable adhesive, and you can see I was kind of getting a little worried I was not going to be able to get it up off there, and it came up. So now I'm going to use my embossing powder, and I wanted to use the black against all that color just to kind of make it pop, and I didn't want to take away from any of the colors on the card. And it says, "Have a sweet day," which I thought was so cute. This will make a really cute birthday card for a little girl or just any little child. Somebody who loves to have fun, loves summer. So I have that heat set now, and I am going to cut this panel down, and I'm going to put it on a mat of Brutus Monroe Lilac Glitterstock. And I'm going to use my Gina K Connect glue just to adhere that to my Nina 110 pound solar white card base. I love this glue. It keeps everything in place. I've tried it on heavy items on a card, like cards with lots of dimension, and it really does hold, which I like because it gives you a little bit of time to move stuff. I love using an adhesive tape, but with the liquid glue, you can kind of move things around if you need to. I did add a piece of fun foam to the back of the panel that we created using the Turnabout. You can see my Gina K Connect glue is about to be out, but never fear, I have backup. This is one of the things in my craft room that I always make sure I have a backup of. And I'm just going to adhere that panel down, and this glue will stick to that Glitterstock. I am going to set 2 acrylic blocks on top of it for a couple minutes just to make sure it evenly adheres. And there's our final card. I love this Turnabout. I had so much fun with this. I have so many ideas for cards to use. This will make great, cute little birthday invitations for a summer birthday. So many fun things you could do with this. You could use any colors. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great day. If you like the video, please like it, give it a thumbs up, and if you've not already subscribed, I hope that you'll consider to get future videos. Thank you so much, and have a fabulous day.